Hello, everyone. This is Whitney Will, and I'm here today to talk to you about the Leo full moon that perfects on January 28th. So, we kind of drop into the energy of this full moon. The moon enters Leo on the 27th at 8 p.m. Mountain Time, which is where I am, so you can just adjust that for what your time zone is. And so all day Wednesday, but especially Wednesday night, we can kind of feel this charge building up. And these days leading up to the full moon, we're in the waxing gibbous phase, which can feel very busy and very active. And so you can kind of feel like you're in the middle of things. Often approaching full moons, I struggle to kind of be intentional with time because it feels like there's so many things demanding my attention, which is good. That's, it's kind of the frenzy of the waxing phase. And this is kind of the point of busyness. And then the full moon is going to be the point where we kind of transition from waxing, starting everything, making sure it's going, into waning, and doing a little bit more kind of rounding things out, completion, and a more kind of receptive state. So we're moving into this full moon, and full moons always have the sun and the moon opposite each other. So that means they're going to be in opposite signs. So the sun is in Aquarius and the moon is in Leo. This represents a culmination from the Leo new moon, which we had on August 18th of 2020. And so if you're interested, you can actually go back and listen to the video that I made for that new moon, kind of see what themes from that new moon might be culminating or kind of reaching a turning point for you here about 6 months later at the culmination of the moon. That new moon was trine to Mars and Aries, so it had a very active quality. When we talk about this full moon, it also makes a strong aspect to Mars, and so action is a theme around these moons. That new moon was conjunct Mercury, so it was could have represented the kind of the beginning of a new mental project. And it kind of was for me because that was one of the first videos that I made where I pulled the lunation, so the full moon or the new moon, out of my normal forecasts. So here we are, 6 months later. Another way to think about it, so Leo is the sun's sign. The sun rules the sign of Leo. And what that means is, for one thing, that wherever the sun is moving through the zodiac and then moving through your birth chart, it's going to be kind of telling stories or affecting the Leo area of your chart. And when it's in the opposite sign, so it's in the opposite sign right now in Aquarius, of the sign that it rules, Leo, it's said to be in exile. And that just means that it struggles to do traditionally solar things. And the way that I see that is that Aquarius is a sign that's really about the good of the many. And Leo and Aquarius is also kind of, it's in some ways all the way zoomed out and abstracted. And so kind of the focus of the individual is not as important to the sun in Aquarius, which is totally fine and allows you to do a lot of other things. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's less solar because the sun, ruling Leo, loves to be kind of embedded in the matrix and fully participating in what's happening around it, whereas Aquarius wants to be zoomed out and have perspective, both for the long haul, but also just kind of, to understand what's going on in a bunch of different ways, but not necessarily as fully present or fully participating. So when we have this full moon in Leo, which we have once a year, we have the sun in this kind of abstracted, faraway place. And it's interesting, right? So the sun is said to be in exile. And one of the kind of significators of Aquarius is this sense of being in exile or of being a foreigner. So in some ways, this leonine part of our chart that really likes to have this warm bonfire, solar center of gravity, is missing that. But we have the moon there. And so now we've got this moon that, and Leo is reflecting the integrity of the sun in the sun's sign. And so there is this kind of, when we think about what the moon offers us and how she communicates with us, it's really through memory and through reflection. And so there's a way in which this full moon invites us to kind of celebrate our authenticity in the context of the collective. So the moon, this very personal space, is bringing in, is reflecting the sun's warmth from the sun's sign. And so while we may be making a lot of personal sacrifices, with social distancing and wearing masks and, feeling isolated in this part of winter. I always feel isolated whenever we get to this point of winter. It's kind of over it. But the moon is really kind of holding that warmth and remembering the joy of Leo, and can make us feel a little more joyful. So that's kind of the invitation into this time. Now, when we look at the specific aspects that are happening to this full moon, it is pretty charged. So full moons are the maximum tension between the sun and the moon, which are the most kind of personal, and describe often our inner landscape and the tension between the sun that wants to stay constant, that wants to self-actualize, and the moon that moves with the natural cycles of the seasons and of our biology. And so it can be kind of the strain between those two. So this is kind of maximum tension point. So full moons can also be the maximum emotional tension of the month. And so we can feel kind of strained. But that crisis can be really fertile. So we can commit to things. We can decide that we're done with certain things. There's a really kind of pivot point quality of like, okay, I've seen how far I can push this thing. So now do I need to change directions? Do I need to finish it? Do I need to give myself a sticker for a job well done? Or whatever your proverbial sticker is. Yeah. And so I like to look at the chart of the full moon to kind of see what are the kind of dynamics happening. And then also when we look at that chart, it kind of describes the energetic quality of the next 2 weeks that we have until our Aquarius new moon on February 11th. So This Leo full moon has the sun conjoining Jupiter. So the sun and Jupiter are both at 9 degrees of Aquarius. So this marks the beginning of a new synodic cycle for Jupiter. It's also the sun visiting Jupiter in a new sign. So this is really the time where we kind of understand what Jupiter's year in Aquarius, because Jupiter spends about a year in each sign. It'll dip into Pisces, just kind of get its toes wet for a couple months in really the second quarter of the year. But for the most part, it's in Aquarius. And so the sun conjoining Jupiter will kind of show us what that's about. And it happening at a full moon is really like, okay, full volume. So Sun-Jupiter conjunctions can get really kind of inflated sometimes. We can dream really big or feel this kind of inflated sense of self. But the sun, again, is in Aquarius, where it doesn't really do that. So we can almost feel the opposite, right? We can feel our smallness in our part, in our place in the collective. We can feel a sense of our own irrelevance. And I would suggest just taking kind of an existentialist view of that, right? So your smallness and the feelings of irrelevance lend you a great deal of freedom. And right, a big piece of freedom is not being tied down in a lot of ways. And so Jupiter and Aquarius can pull us to break ties with belief systems that are holding us back, and connect us with a deeper, richer community around us. Aquarius is the exile and can often feel kind of just like an outsider, but kind of the magic of Aquarius is that if you just do your weirdness, you actually create a circle of belonging around you that either people are attracted to that and want to participate, or you make it okay for other people to be as unique as they are. So that's a real opportunity. With the sun conjunct Jupiter. Now that's also going to be Jupiter opposing the moon, which can bring out pretty strong emotions. So I think, right, instead of trying to shut everything down, instead of trying to limit everything down, Aquarius wants to do what's rational. And so that can be kind of not quite emotional. I would maybe lean into it with the Aquarian perspective that emotions are transient and that they do not last unless you imprison them. So it's more like, how can I move through things? And in Leo, I think, the emotions that we move through, it's a fire sign. So, there's a sense of passion. Anger can participate in that. And especially when we get to Mars, there can be some anger. But a big thing about Leo is joy. And I think it is really hard for us to feel at home in the moments where we feel joy, because in the larger context, right? Aquarius, larger context, people have lost loved ones to COVID this year. People are struggling because of systemic racism. People are struggling because of our economic systems that imprison them. And so we can really struggle in these moments where we might be celebrating something to let ourselves have that. And I think this is an opportunity to celebrate the places in your life where you are experiencing joy, no matter how small they are. I will never forget, there's a passage in George Eliot's book, Middlemarch, where there's this one character, and she, Dorothea, and she is very serious and very religious and very concerned with all the suffering in the world. And she asks another character, like, what is the point of art? What is the point of art in this world that suffers so much? And he basically responds by saying, like, you want to change the youth of the world into a tragic chorus. And that one of the most important ways that we change the nature of the world is to enjoy the world. And that we're not actually doing anyone any good to deny ourselves, to deny the goodness in the world that is. So, yeah, I think it's not, right? It's not about ignoring these things. And your joy does not negate the suffering of other people, right? We don't want to gloat, but joy is a piece of vitality. And I think that that's what this Leo full moon really wants us to remember in the dead of winter, in the space of denial, in the season of Aquarius, is that, yeah, all of these bigger truths are no less true, but still, this is your one life in between eternities of darkness. And I hope you can find moments to really set yourself on fire with the enjoyment of pieces of it. So if you've been holding back your joy and your gratitude, I think kind of the best way to honor this full moon is to let yourself have some of them. We've got a few other things going on. So we have this full moon that occurs at 9 degrees of Aquarius and Leo, squares Uranus and Mars. So Uranus and Mars had a conjunction on the 20th, and they're separating from that. We've got Uranus at about 6 degrees. I think Mars is at, I forget, 11 or 13 degrees of Taurus. But those are both still within orb to square this full moon. And so kind of, we talked about Mars conjoining Uranus being kind of a potential flashpoint. When we have squares that are 90-degree angles, these are kind of the other most tense points besides oppositions. So oppositions, 180 degrees square, 90 degrees squares create conflict. Which way are we going to go? Which direction are we going to go? For the planet that's squared, I mean, so for Mars, are you going to go with the sun? Are you going to go with the moon? And the same thing for Uranus. And those squares, so Mars and Uranus, can really interrupt the storyline. Okay, so now we have the interruption of this moment that you are allowing yourself to celebrate something. With Mars being like, we really need to take action. And as we've kind of been living into this Uranus and Taurus years, I've been really connecting with the idea that Uranus and Taurus is telling us not to forget the physical world around us and not to forget our bodies. Taurus is very grounded in its body and in its connection to physical resources, to nature also. And so there's this way in which it's like, okay, do this thing, but do not do it in this way that you are dissociating from what's actually around you. So maybe this is, one way to experiment with it, and that's a key word for Uranus, is we're experimenting with new things, is, try new foods or eat in a different way. That can be something. It might be deciding to get rid of a bunch of your clothes or a bunch of your stuff. It might be deciding that this year you're going to apply for a community garden plot and learn how to grow your own food. these are just some ideas, right? You can take the themes and work with them. That square to Mars is an impetus to action. And we've also got that, this kind of separating square of Jupiter and Mars, which can get pretty hot-headed. And the warrior is kind of on a holy war in this one. And so there can be this really strong impetus to take action. I'm hoping on the collective level that this looks like action around climate change. I'm hoping that Uranus in Taurus is action around climate change. I think we will be provided the opportunity with Uranus and Taurus to see a lot of the natural world showing us what climate change has already done to it. So that's that square. The final piece that I want to talk about, this does not aspect the full moon directly, but it's in the chart and it's really significant. And that is that Venus conjoins Pluto, also on the day of the full moon. And when anything conjoins Pluto, when anything has Plutonian contact, Pluto is kind of this power warp that makes small things big, that makes big things small, blows things out of proportion, and it can be in either direction. And part of that is so that we understand and integrate the fragility of life. And also, I think, so that we don't take things too seriously. But often that lesson comes after, when we have taken something, we've blown something way out of proportion and made it huge. And so when that happens with Venus, that can happen with Venusian things. So that can be relationship issues, that can be money, relationship stuff, that can be like, feeling abandoned in a conversation and it triggers your trauma from your childhood and you get really, really upset. So kind of, I think there's a lot of attachment trauma that gets triggered by Venus-Pluto contact. And so that's not just the conjunction, it happens with the squares as well. It can happen with the opposition, but this is definitely one of those trigger points for attachment, trauma, and abandonment. So just practice self-care around that. And, if you are getting worked up around some communication or around some attachment, give it some time before you react. That's not to say that the strength of your emotion is not valid or is not worthy of being heard. It is about taking responsibility to protect those vulnerable parts of you and not to re-traumatize them and not to traumatize the people around us with the strength of them. And so it's really this process that we go through with our trauma of reparenting ourselves, of taking that really frightened being at the core of us and asking what they need to feel safe and then giving it to them ourselves rather than asking the people around us to stand in for something that actually happened a long time ago. So we don't want to cast people as characters in the drama that they didn't audition for, as Esther Perel says. So, I spend a lot of time talking about relationships. I also think with Venus-Pluto, to kind of lean into the money side of Venus, we have this crazy thing going on in the stock market with the short squeeze and GameStop, and I think it will be really interesting to see what happens with Wall Street losing a lot of money and individual citizens gaining a lot of money, or maybe it will flip on Thursday. But that's a storyline that I'm following also with this approach of Venus to Pluto. And I think because it's in the full moon chart, which lasts another 2 weeks until the new moon, we'll see that story play out in that way as well. And that's what I have for you for this Leo full moon. I wish you a celebration. And I hope you get some kind of moments of joy in it. It's a lot of big energy. Those squares are big, the conjunctions are big. This is like, I feel, this is a full moon that's really at full volume. So I'd love to hear your stories. You can, after the full moon, if you get a chance, let me know what happened. You can also message me on Instagram. And you can find my work at my website at starheartastrology.com. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and share it. That makes all the difference to me. And thank you so much. Happy Leo full moon.